Welcome back. This is part two of the Roman Revolution book review. When last we left, Aurelian was dead. Aurelian, who was deemed the so called savior of the Roman Empire. To recap, the Roman Empire was pretty much in decline in many respects for almost 40 years at this point. Aurelian came back in. He was basically one of the best Roman generals in a generation. Uh, got rid of the breakaway empires, the Palmyrene Empire and the Gallic Empire, reunited the Roman Empire, and his thanks was a sword in the back. Betrayed by somebody who was trying to get rid of Aurelian before they were executed themselves. Didn't really work out for them because they ended up being executed anyway in retaliation for forging Aurelian's signature on false executions of other people. So, why were so many Roman emperors being killed during this time? That's a great question. Well, you see, the Praetorian Guard for a long time was making and breaking emperors. They had accumulated a lot of power over the years, and it didn't really matter who was emperor. If you weren't paying them enough, basically, they were going to find somebody else who would pay them what they wanted, and then they would kill you. So this is what's happening over and over again. And finally, we are getting closer to the other savior of the Roman Empire during this generation, Diocletian. So Diocletian, a little background, he was also part of the military, as many as emperors ended up being. That was many times the way to come to power during this time. So after Aurelian, there was a bit of chaos again. And then following that, there was only really one other good Roman emperor who gets kind of lost in the story, Probus. Also, I believe, came from the military. He served as emperor for about 5 or 6 years. And then it's not until around like 283, 284, Diocletian finally comes to power during his own sort of civil war, which is kind of how these emperors sort of make their bones during this time. So Diocletian comes to power, and he will end up ruling as emperor for 21 years. And what makes Diocletian so special is that he ends up retiring as Roman emperor, which is basically the first time this ever happened in the empire. But we'll get to that. So Diocletian, the changes he makes to the Roman Empire are long lasting and essentially will set the stage for many following monarchies to come. So during this time, Roman emperors were starting to realize, ever since almost Marcus Aurelius' time, that the empire was just getting too big to manage. The emperor couldn't be everywhere all at once. It goes back even further to Hadrian's time. So after Trajan conquered Dacia, which was basically modern day Romania, the Roman Empire didn't really engage in any conquests anymore because they couldn't even manage what they had. So Hadrian famously builds the Hadrian Walls and all this interrelated defense system all across the empire. He's one of the first emperors to visit every province of the empire, which, if you can imagine, takes a long time during this time to do. So it is a real crazy feat. But Marcus Aurelius, who's known for the meditations more than being emperor, spends much of his reign up just trying to keep the German tribes out of the Roman Empire. So, how these emperors got around this, a lot of times they appointed a successor. During the time, they would adopt someone that would be either their adopted son, usually not even their biological son. So that's kind of what Marcus Aurelius had done. He had sort of jointly shared his reign to with another emperor whose name I forget at this point. So this was known for a long time. The empire is way too big. Uh, and it's only once Diocletian comes to power that this is actually enacted finally. So Diocletian comes in. He enacts a lot of changes, one of which, if you can believe it or not, is a huge tax reform in terms of, you know, making the system more equitable and driving in greater revenues. But Diocletian's also a very defensive emperor too. He's not going to be engaging in other additional conquests. He recognizes that the empire needs better management. It needs a better and more stable political system, and this is exactly what he goes on doing. So, one of the major things he's known for the most is the so-called tetrarchy. So, what is this? So, basically, Diocletian is emperor. He appoints a co-emperor, which these emperors, by the way, are known as Augusti. So, Augustus, the first Roman emperor, basically this title is adopted by every succeeding emperor. So, they're not known as an emperor, they're known as Augustus. So Diocletian's the main Augustus. He appoints a co-Augustus, and each of them appoint in turn their own Caesar, which is their number two. So the empire gets split up into basically an east and a west, which is going to be setting up the Byzantine Empire for another 1,000 years. But also the co-emperors, Caesars, are in control of other territories too. Of course, nobody forgets that Diocletian is the main boss here. Okay, so when you come to see Diocletian, he's going to be wearing the purple. He's going to look very royal. You have the bow in his presence. So the time of the Principate under Augustus is long over at this point. So Augustus was emperor, king, whatever you want to call him, all but name only, but he titled himself historically as the first citizen of Rome, while adopting many other titles at the time. But that's going way back because the Romans historically, after pushing out their last kings, didn't want to necessarily be ruled by a king. So this was Augustus' sort of word speak to get around that, as you will. I mean, nobody doubted that Augustus was essentially in charge. But Diocletian now has fully adopted these measures. The Roman emperor is basically the king, and also Rome itself, even though it's the main capital, it's no longer the capital is no longer a specific place anymore. It's now going to be wherever the emperor is at the time. So Diocletian, if he's in another city, that's essentially where the Roman Empire capital is going to be now. And this leads to Rome essentially itself, the city itself, not being as important anymore. And this sets up also Constantinople to be sort of the more glorious capital that will come under Constantine, who will succeed after Diocletian. So Diocletian puts a lot of order together, which allows Constantine later on to keep the order. But Diocletian's methods and systems don't last forever. So it's only as strong as the person keeping it together, right? So he's got the East and he's got the West. It's a real strong order under him for about 2 decades. And finally, famously, he announces he's retiring. And they can't believe it. He even gets his co-Augustus to retire along with him, and so that they can appoint the next people to take over. So this is Diocletian's kind of way of creating his succession, which the Roman emperors had so much trouble doing over the centuries, no matter what they do. Augustus couldn't do it. Marcus Aurelius couldn't do it. Everyone tried. They had their own sort of small dynasty for a few decades, but that was about it usually. It would devolve into civil war. They would fight over the territory. A new one would be appointed. It's also been very long since an emperor came from Italy itself. So Diocletian, I'm pretty sure, was outside the empire, the Italian Empire, that is. Since Caracalla's time, it didn't really matter necessarily if you were born in Italy to be part of the empire, that was a famous decree where the citizenship was granted to everyone in the Roman Empire. So this is another thing and another great invention of the Romans themselves, and why they create this Pax Romana, because they were able to extend their citizenship to all the people of the empire. So everyone felt like they were benefiting, they were being included in terms of being able to engage in commerce and whatnot. The citizenship of this time of the Romans is essentially almost like a universal passport. Let's think of it that way. So to be Roman granted enormous benefits, even if you were more in the peasant areas. So where were we? So Diocletian retires, and he thinks his system's going to last. He thinks he's finally figured it out. And Diocletian, don't get me wrong, is a really unique emperor. The Tetrarchy's a brilliant invention, recognizing what was already really true. But a few years after he steps down, it devolves into civil war again, because the people adopted as the Caesars aren't the kids. And so, of course, when the Augustus dies, Constantine's appointed as an Augustus in York in Britain. And so the system just breaks down within a few years. People try to beg, they plead for Diocletian to come out of retirement to try to repair the system. And he says, no, I'm enjoying planting my cabbages, and I'm basically being a farmer. And this is what I love about Diocletian the most, that he's like, I did my part. I'm getting the hell out of here. I don't want to be back involved in this. I did my time. I'm sick. I'm old. I just want to plant my cabbages in my palace in modern day Croatia, by the way. And so he doesn't come back. His co-Augustus tries to get back into the fray. He loses to Constantine. Constantine essentially takes over with Licinius. They kind of keep the East-West divide going on for a while, but Constantine wasn't going to essentially share power either. And, eventually he deposes his co-emperor, and he is essentially, de facto the one ruler of Rome. But Constantine's method of trying to keep control is a little different from Diocletian. So he goes the religious route. So he grants toleration to Christians. He allows them greater autonomy and freedom within the empire. And this allows him to sort of unify the empire together and keep it going for many more decades. Again, leads to, organization that many European medieval monarchies would adopt later. So between Diocletian and Constantine, it really is kind of true that it's a Roman revolution. And this guy did write a part 2, which I haven't read yet, but it's going to continue this process going on of the empire changing and sort of setting up later for the Byzantine Empire, which would still be considered the Roman Empire. It's only later on when historians mark the times that they changed to the Byzantine Empire, but that would last to 1453, when they were deposed by the Ottoman Empire, which would last almost another 500 years. So we will continue on when I finish part 2 of this book.